Okay, so I'm keeping, like I'd mentioned, the coaching track separate, just kind of staying on that. I do know what I want to do this afternoon, which I will actually mention. Oh, VZ's here. Good. I hadn't seen, I was just connecting. Uh, I've been really seeing some key missing pieces, and the coaching track has some of them, but some others are just things about product management, actually. I realized I was always putting myself in a position of talking to product managers, product owners rather. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Scrum shouldn't have product owners that don't have main concepts. So I kind of realized that. So this afternoon, I'm going to actually map out, not actually do any work per se, as much as map out what I think is in Amplio that's missing in Scrum and Safe and less. I'll include less because that's kind of big. And also, for that matter, I suppose Scrum at scale. There are at least a dozen serious concepts because I think that's one way we can talk about something new, not so much talk about the lack there, but use these concepts to explain why things work. And we're going to see an example here, by the way. So what this is a coaching track. Now, I had talked about doing some other things today, but what I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to try to make the PowerPoint be in the order of how we've done, put more things in the PowerPoint about what we do. And one of the things I realize we really need to have is an understanding of human psychology before we go into some of the other things I had on the plate. Like we had talked about pre-mortems and the clean slate game, but I think just some really basic background in coaching that people don't seem to have a lot. Now, this is something that people, humans, I mean, not just people who are taking coaching courses, the humans have a lot of experience with what I'm going to talk about today, but they don't truly understand it. Most people don't. I mean, I'm not saying you do or you don't do. I find that a lot of people do understand it, but the clarity of it and the power with it is something I think is missing. This is what I learned in the 80s or when I first got exposed to it. It's written about a lot in a lot of books, but hearing about it and doing it are two different things. So this is going to be a fairly experiential one. Now, what I want to talk about are three things that everybody has, including myself. You do not get past these. Sometimes these are just labeled cognitive bias and things of that nature, but actually, there's more to it than that, and there's more to understand than that. And once you start observing it in yourself, and that's what it takes, that's my experience anyway. The only way to truly defeat them, and by defeating them, I don't mean to get rid of them. You don't get rid of them. You can only pretend to get rid of them, and that's actually more of them. That's the problem. Uh, the only way to lower the effect they have on you is to observe them and be a study of observing them. And they're quite useful. I saw this in a post by somebody the other day where they were talking about how people were reacting to them. And it was clear he never thought about that they weren't really reacting to him as much as they were reminded of their past and they were reacting to the past. And once we start paying attention to this, it's amazing what we can see. So I might have things in the wrong order. Sorry, we're pushing the wrong button. I don't need artificial intelligence. I just need an intelligent keyboard. Why would I be going up when I just started a session? You should know better. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. People's filters, transformers, and triggers. Okay, this is only part of the human mechanism of survival, which is why you're not going to get out of it. You're not going to defeat millions of years of survival training that's been in your body. So just accept that. Uh, People don't listen to what you say, they listen to their listening. I've mentioned this before, but I want to get really clear about this. Their listening comes from what you say, but it gets filtered and transformed, and then they add other stuff to it. Now, again, one of the ways I look at it a lot of times when you say this to people, the first time they say, what is he talking about? The what is he talking about is what I'm talking about. That's your internal voice that people identify with as being them. It turns out it's not you. That's another conversation I'm not going to get into. That internal conversation you have about what's going on in your head that we all identify as being us is not us. And it's useful. That's another useful conversation, but that's a life coaching conversation. And if you guys request it, I'd be happy to do it. I've had a fair amount of training in that. But this is the thing. I want to define this. This is a definition. I'll add a slide later about it. That in fact, it'll just take me an instant to do it because I was just looking at this. So let me copy here. Okay. So what they hear is not you, but they're listening. Okay, this is a noun. And I'm going to add the slide right here while I'm thinking about it. New slide, definition. Not as a verb, but as a noun. And this is who introduced it. This is where I heard it from. Now, he probably got it from other places. He did acknowledge where he got stuff from, but to be candid, I was just listening to what he was saying. And the places he was talking about were things like, well, actually, I read Monterana, but I could not get through Being in Time, and I could not get through Wittgenstein. So I kind of filtered everything myself listening to him. But he's the one I heard at first as the concept introduced, emphasizing how people listen to the internal conversations in their head. Listening as a noun is the conversation in someone's head. See, I told you to need a new keyboard. Anyway, are you going to be buggy? She's still not recovered from when we abandoned her and left her unattended for a week, which is not true. We had 2 people come in and give her food, but that's her story, and she's sticking with it. So this is very important because when you know this, and you all know this, okay, I know you know this. This is not a brand new concept. It's nothing you experience this every second of the day and every time you talk to somebody. But there's a way to use this knowledge to almost read people's minds inaccurately much of the time. But you get clues to what's going on for them. And I want to do an exercise for this to illustrate this. Okay. So the question is, can you hear what people are thinking? Can you hear the conversation they're having in their heads and they're listening? So what are your opinions about that? I want to get some feedback. It's got to be an interactive session. So I'll start with this question. That's the question I'm asking and get some input from y'all.
Well, I would think you can certainly infer some from their outward behavior, right? Their body
That's right.
language, etc. But technically, I don't think you can listen into their brain.
No, you cannot listen into their
No.
brain. I like the body language. So let's say you're having a conversation with your significant other, and let me be that significant other. And I've been acting a little irritated. And then you say something. You say, I'm angry. And I say, I am not angry. What do you think is going on in my head when I do that? Yeah, you get what I'm talking about.
So tone of voice can make a big difference
Tone of
too.
voice makes a big difference. So there's also
Also,
clues. I'm sorry.
really long pauses can make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right. You can't really hear the thing inside what's going on, but you can remember the listening is what they're listening to. And can you hear some of what they're listening to? I guess is the question. So let's take an example of this. Consider this situation. So you're talking to a marketing person, the person who tells you what to do. Hey, we need this enhancement. We've got a customer. They da 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 da. And let's say it appears it'll take about 6 months to complete the enhancements, but that there are clear increments that could be delivered sooner. Okay, like MVIs. And you say you're trained, you're the product owner or somebody, or you're the team, and you have some sense that MVIs are there, but you don't know what they are because the marketing person knows what they are. And you ask this question, we'll deliver it all, but what part of this can be delivered sooner? And they respond, no, I need it all. I don't want only some of it. What are filters? Oh, let me define these 3 terms. Sorry, I didn't define the terms. So a filter is when somebody says something and they don't actually hear what you said. Some of it got filtered out. Okay. The degree to which people filter is kind of high and sometimes inversely correlated. Let me say this, sometimes correlated actually with intelligence. I know for myself, I filter way more than a lot of people, and it's not a good thing. I'm just, my mind is zinging along and I've got heuristics and I apply them and my mind is buzzing and I'm not really listening a lot of the time. I'm filtering, trying to get to the point. So whether you filter, you don't filter, if anything, the more filtering, which is bad, is not because they're not capable. It's just the opposite. Okay. Also has to do with personal relationships. But filtering has a lot to do with how we perceive the world. Okay. Transformations are you say something, but they heard something else. In other words, they transformed what you said. And then triggers. You said something, and what a phrase is, it plugged them in. You ever say something kind of innocent, and all of a sudden, whoa, why are you attacking me now? Okay, so I should have probably had these as separate slides. Is what's a filter, what's a transformation, what's a trigger? I need an example of each of these from you before we go on with the real exercise.
Well, filters are fundamentally based on vocabulary. So if
That's
you
true.
say something, then people immediately assume they know what you're talking about when maybe you're not talking about their understanding of what, and that's actually the whole purpose of the conversation, is to shift or expand their understanding of a concept.
Yeah, so they will take their definition of the words you're using and apply them to what you said, which may be two different things.
Yeah, and want to shut down the conversation and move on to whatever they think is more important because I already know
Exactly.
that.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
heard that. I know that. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm an excellent example of that, by the way, right? I mean,
I'm not making any points of anybody who might happen to
oh,
be
I know. That's all right. I'll
hosting the
take it
meeting
on. I'll
or,
take it on. Okay, good. What about a transformation or another filter?
Another filter, the typical cartoon example, blah, 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 delay, blah, 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 blah. All I hear is the one word.
Yeah, there's a cartoon. It was by some CEO. He says, well, no, that was another one actually. But it shows a woman talking to her poodle, and the woman is saying, "Bad dog, you should never do that, Fluffy, ever. That was a horrible thing." And it's blah 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 Fluffy blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, another thing about filters or transformation. You say something. Now notice filters and transformations are related actually, right? Because Andrew said you said something, they said something, rather they heard something and then they transformed it into their understanding. So what's an example of that? A specific.
Actually, the word metrics can make people think that you're going to blame them for something, for example.
Ooh, okay. I would say that might be a trigger instead of a
True.
transformation. But they are related, aren't they? That's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. What if somebody says agile and they hear Scrum because they think Scrum is agile, or vice versa? What are other transformations?
Or when they hear the word agile and they think, oh, that means you won't do any planning.
Yeah. Okay, so they're inferring some knowledge about something. Right. Yeah, I worked with a company once where XP actually thought that, and no documentation either.
Yeah. Or
Yeah, I mean,
you are in an agile situation and you talk about creating some sort of an artifact and they say, no, we don't do documentation.
Right.
yeah, I think the way I understand the transformations is it's basically all of the linked concepts and knowledge associated with whatever it is you're saying. So if you say something, whatever that is, then your understanding, your assumptions, your feelings, your perspective on that all come to fore. And this is one of the things that I think Senge and Jaworski talk about in terms of being able to suspend your assumptions so that you
Right.
can get in a state of dialogue.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, because that's really the key understanding for a coach is that I might be talking about what filters, transformation, triggers they have, but we have to be aware of what filters, transformations, and triggers we have. Because when you're aware of them, when you have a filter, you might ask, well, maybe they meant something other than this, or maybe I'm missing something. See, that's what I often see is I realize I missed something. Something's inconsistent here. Maybe I missed something. Or maybe what I heard is not what they meant. Okay. So what's a trigger? This has sometimes been referred to as a stack attack if you took a personal development workshop in the 70s or 80s. That's what it was often referred to as a stack attack.
Yeah, just
Somebody,
like in Susan's example where she says blah 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 delay blah blah blah. So people only hear certain part of it, and if that then triggers an association that is negative, then everything else that you say can be overshadowed or just being rendered mute by that association that they have to that one word or that one aspect of a plan.
okay, yeah, you're describing something else. I'm trying to get a finer definition. Let me explain what I would call what you're describing. You're describing an association, but it's true. So they hear delay and now they assume that's what you're talking about. Now, what about delay do they do? What's their reaction to delay?
It's their assumption of the impact, whatever you're saying is going to happen to them, or it's waiting for an opportunity to hear something that will help them advance their own agenda, whatever that is.
Now, is it a calm, emotionless
Oh, God,
Oh,
no.
hearing,
sure.
or is there some reaction they have about it?
Well, yeah, generally, I mean, the way that you've got it set up here, it's definitely on the negative side. So
Yeah,
somebody is expecting you to do something, and whether you're going to do it or not, if they hear something they think is going to imply to them that that's what's going to happen, then that's the trigger.
yeah, yeah. Now
It's
it could
all
be a
connected
positive.
to the other
I'm sorry.
things,
Yeah, it could
but
be a
it's all
positive trigger.
yeah.
Okay, so here's why so that's what I'm looking for. What are triggers in the sense that yes, it's an association, but it's not a logical association, it's an automatic association that evokes some response based on your past. That's what I mean by trigger. Okay, so give me another example of a trigger of that type. Something gets said, you associate it with something in the past, and now you have an emotional response, good or bad, that happens. They can be good, but they're usually bad, and I'll explain why it's usually bad in a minute.
I know we don't discuss politics here, but a good deal of political discussion appears to be to deliberately trigger.
Yeah, that's true. No, we're not talking politics there. You're talking about the mechanism of it. That's fine. Yeah, that's right. A lot of politics is a lot of discussions is to trigger people and make them angry. I know I've never said anything about Scrum without the intent of triggering anything.
Well, I think back to Susan's metric example too. I mean, you know, if you have been blamed because your work was measured in the past and you did not hit your targets or those measurements were couched against you, then yeah, you're going to definitely be triggered by the thought of metrics because of the implication of what had happened before.
Exactly. So this is why these three are very important to understand. And as we've been discussing them, I've been trying to get clear about the definitions, but you see how highly interrelated they are. Yeah, Susan.
And I think a trigger is perceived as something being used as a weapon rather than as a tool.
If it's deliberate, yes. Yeah, so you can deliberately trigger people, and that's a
Yeah,
weapon.
but I mean,
That's fine.
it can be perceived that way on the other
Right.
side, even if it's not deliberate.
Oh yeah. So okay, I see. So what I think you just said, I missed it the first time. Why? Because I transformed it into something and I filtered it and I had a trigger on it. I think what you said, and this is how you verify that this is a verification method, that when somebody gets triggered, the intention may not have been to trigger them, but they sometimes think they were triggered intentionally being used as a tool.
Yeah,
Well,
well, I
been
mean,
used as a weapon because
Yeah, as a weapon.
the
I
things
meant
that
as a
really
weapon.
trigger people are often things that can be used as weapons or as tools.
That's right. They can be used both ways. And sometimes it's inferred that's how it was intended. Yeah, okay.
well, and I think it's entirely, you know, the situation in which the conversation happens has a big deal to do with it too, because I mean, if you come at it from the transactional analysis perspective, what a trigger is basically you're putting somebody into victim mode, where they're playing the victim role or they perceive themselves to play the victim
That's right.
role. And so they want to get out of it. So what do? They do the context switch to persecutor and then let you have it because they don't want to recognize
That's right.
that they actually might have a weakness in that area or that you've said something that they don't particularly appreciate.
Yeah. Now, there's a question, maybe a deeper question, is why do we do this? I don't think when we are 1 or 2 and starting to learn language and learning social skills as we get a little older, decide to add filters, transformations, and triggers. In other words, we got to recognize this as a physiological thing. And then the question is, if we didn't decide to do it, what is it? And how does it get decided? And it's just in the 70s and 80s, they didn't quite understand that. They just knew it happened. So I was kind of got this from an experiential point of view. But since then, there have been many, many, many books on this. Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow talks about this to a large extent. I've been starting to read a book on clear thinking that talks about this to an extent, about how we get into different emotional things. And, our book, Paula Stewart and my book, talks a lot about this. But I'm going to talk about something we don't talk about in the book, but I found to be a true thing. It's a model, so this is a theory, but it seems to fit well. And that's why I called it a stack attack. And it has to do with when you're in an intense situation, highly emotional, and usually having something to do with survival, that some of that, what's around you, gets imprinted on you and your brain. It just kind of gets stored, and the associations and all the events get stored in your brain. Now, this makes sense from a survival point of view, because if something bad happened and you survived it, doesn't matter what happens if you don't survive it. But if you do survive it, the brain now knows in a similar situation, this is how I can get out of it. Okay. So that makes sense. And that's this imprinting. And your brain actually kind of remembers all these things. Actually, the brain's potential for remembering everything that happened is really remarkable. There are people who are called to having photographic memories and things like that. I actually knew somebody like that. It was really amazing. He just naturally knew stuff. And some people believe that's a natural ability we all have, but we just don't get to, that we just don't have access to per se, but the brain has that capability. Anyway, what happens is sometimes out of something that happens, you also make a decision that you live your life out of. And I'll share one for me. When I was a kid, about 6 years old, uh, my oldest brother had cancer. And in those days, this was a death sentence. I mean, no kid survived. And my mom used to go up to a place where they were doing experimental cancer treatments. I mean, it was cutting edge stuff. It wasn't like going down to Mexico and get drugs or something. This was kind of scientific, but it hadn't been done a lot. And he survived. But my mom never told me why she was going away from me. Okay, I think that was a mistake in judging his parenting. She was good natured. She was wanting to spare me the worry of what was going on with my older brother. But boy, that caused a lot of trauma. Your mom, you're a little kid, you're being abandoned. I had all sorts of crap like that. Being abandoned. Man, I could just feel it, just bringing it back up. Just talking about it presents it. And I made a decision. I remember making a decision. Okay, there are ways to get back and pull up your memories. They're called and I've done that. Sometimes it's through hypnosis and all that. And my decision was a couple of things. Is I had to make a difference to be loved. You can actually see a little bit about this still in my personality, right? I'm always striving to get stuff done. That happened back when I was 6 years old. I'm very clear about it. I'm very clear about it. I kind of try to diminish it with meditation. It's not as bad as it used to be. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's not my choice. That happened to me back then. It was a choice as a 6-year-old survival mechanism. Now, the problem with this, that may have worked as a 6-year-old, But now, as we get older, and anything like being abandoned, whoa, all that stack attack, that's what I meant. The brain has it stored and it just comes up. And this is the problem. You get into intense situations, it gets imprinted in your brain, and the decisions we make at the time has a lot to do with it. Studies have shown there's a decision we make when we're real little, like 6 or less, with decisions we make when we're teenagers and decisions we make when we're young adults that impact us forever. The point is then anything that's earlier and similar comes back to hit us, and that's what causes the triggers, transformations, and filters, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Traffic is a place where this happens all the time. Somebody cuts you off, and it's not super dangerous, it's just rude, and most people feel really upset about it. Like that really made a difference. But it triggers something in the past when you were disrespected and felt bad about it. And now you have no mechanism, it just comes up. You have nothing to do with the mechanism. You cannot stop the mechanism. Now, I'm not saying you're not responsible for your actions. I want to be clear about this, and then we'll go on. You're responsible for your actions, but you have to act quickly and diminish the trigger. Now, there's a response between the trigger and the action. You can intervene and take a breath. And that's what you do. And when you start noticing the trigger happen and take a breath, you get more facility in it. Okay, so add anything you want to say, either ask questions or share something if you want, and then we'll continue with the exercise. But I want to give an opportunity to go deeper on this, or and relate to it.
I actually had a slightly different interpretation when you first mentioned this phrase stack attack.
Yeah.
I thought it was a word to describe an overreaction against what people might perceive as an attack to the very foundation of their livelihood. So, for example, let's say you have a part of developers that work in Microsoft, and then some others who work in open source. And if someone suggests, hey, let's use this open source library, it might be perceived as an attack on this whole tech stack, and therefore trigger a disproportionate response.
Oh, that's so great, because that's actually illustrating all the stuff we're talking about. And probably the emotion is when when somebody's been forced to do something they don't like, or Microsoft is evil, which is fortunately that there was a time that was really seriously perceived. I think it's gotten better. But yeah, why did people react that way though? So that wasn't what I was referring to. But why did people react that way, I think, is all explained in these 3 things, right? Oh, why do I call it a stack attack? Why did they call it? It's kind of like your brain has all these memories. Everything you've ever done is in your brain and in your subconscious. So it's like you have this stack of memories. And then when an earlier similar comes up, like somebody cuts me off driving, boy, it just comes that stack of memories about being disrespected and cut off just pop up into my emotions. I can remember times in high school. I was one of these loners in high school, and people just didn't respect me and would just, not paying any attention to me. And this car cutting in front of me, that just brings that up. Well, it doesn't anymore, but it does now. I spent literal years in driver's therapy. No, I'm kidding. The driver's therapy is just noticing how I would get irritated. I would notice, oh, you got irritated. Oh, yeah, okay, I just got irritated. It's okay. And for me, it was a long time, because I think I mentioned once I lived in Cambridge and in Boston. The worst drivers in the world are in Boston, or at least I know they're worse than Paris, and I know they're worse than New York City, because I've driven in New York City. I've seen Paris drivers, and I scared the hell out of a couple of Parisians with my driving, and when they were in Boston doing something I thought was perfectly safe. So, but I'm now a very nice driver. And the reason is my bad driving was a combination of skill I learned in Boston and this automaticity. So that's why it's called a stack attack. That's why they call that. Okay, so let's come back to the exercise. You say, we'll deliver it all, but what part of this can be delivered sooner? And they say, no, I need it all. I don't want only some of it. So what do we have going on here? What are some of the filters, transformations, and triggers they have about that conversation?
I think there's one thing that I meant to say earlier that goes back
Sure.
to what you asked about how you read people's minds, in addition to all of the indirect things like body language and tone and this thing. It's the questions they ask, the
Yeah.
comments that they make.
That's right.
So in this case, they think you're not going to do any more than what you deliver first.
That's right.
You're
Now,
going to get way on some other project, and they're not going to get all of what they're on the hook to deliver.
so now two things have happened. Not only are you not going to deliver it, they're going to catch blame for it, and that triggers all the emotions.
Yes.
Now, this isn't 100% accurate, obviously, because like Thomas said, you really can't get into their head. But is this worth considering as being possibly what's going on? And you don't have to ask them. That's the problem. If you ask people about this, they usually say no. You could say, you could add more, but keep going. So that was good. What else do you have? What else could you notice? That was pretty nice though.
One thing you might ask is, has it ever come to the end of a project and something was delivered and it wasn't quite what you expected?
Nice. Now that's a positive trigger. That's good.
And then go on to the importance of feedback and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also that the concept of incremental delivery can trigger people feeling that you are not working, what's the word now? You are going to be changed, or you're not going to deliver your best because you say, okay, I'm going to deliver in increments, or I'm going to reduce the size, the batch size of work. So again, that could trigger people feeling that they are going to change, or you're not going to give it your best, or you're not going to put in all of your efforts. So that's my take on that.
Yeah.
So when the question says, go ahead.
No, you finish.
Okay, because in this question it says, we'll deliver it all. And I say, what part of this can be delivered sooner? And the guy responds, no, I need it all.
Yeah, he
So
filtered out the you're going to deliver it all because he doesn't believe you because of what Andrew said happened to him in the past. So notice sometimes the filters are caused by triggers. Yeah, I'm sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to, just wanted to inject that.
no, that's my point. And
yeah. Now this is interesting, and it's going to tie into something I'm about to show after this, because there's besides just kind of hearing this, there's another piece here. Is what you said inferred that we could actually use this to explain a little bit about why we do incremental development. And the way you said it was about an advantage to them. And this goes to what Susan said about that you don't want to wait to the end. You actually want to get some feedback. So, hey, this way I'll be able to deliver what you need. So I could say, well, here's why we want to build that first, is then you can validate we're on the right track. So we're actually not arguing with them about what they don't know. We're actually showing why this is in their benefit. Now, there's another thing that's in their benefit that they would have no clue most of the time. As a developer, one of the things I've learned is that usually working on the most important thing first, whether it's deliverable or not deliverable, is usually the best thing I could be working on. Now, if I have risks to mitigate, I'll do that too. But even there, I would pick the most important thing and then address the risks of getting the most important value out there. In fact, our topic with Tom Gill tomorrow is going to be about success criteria and what's needed. And he and I were talking about, some people are talking about risk first and deal with that. And we're saying, no, it's value first, but you might look at the risks on the most valuable things. So when I use this and I talk to these conversations y'all have been having here, I address like what, BZU and Susan talked about, like there's value for them. But I also express the value for us. By the way, this makes my life easier. I'm asking you to tell me this as a favor to me. Seriously, say, look, you're going to get it all. I'm not asking you to give me the smallest bid I can get sooner so I can cut you off. I'm asking because I can get the job done and have less risk getting all of it done for you. See, so now we're addressing their belief systems and their concerns. That all make sense? Yeah. And
I think there's one thing here as well that I just noticed whenever I was reading it again, since Abizi's asked the question again. I mean, I would caution that the structure of the question itself sets this up because of the word but. Because what people learn is that anything followed or preceding a but is basically off the table. And anything you say after the but is actually what they mean. So I mean, I don't remember where I learned this, but it was in
you're
some
right. No, it's brilliant.
communication language, whatever. But the thing is that, you know, and I try in my writing and speaking not as much, but I try and work on this consciously because that's how people see it. Because it's, you know, this, but actually, no, you don't look fat in that, but actually,
Well,
have you thought about changing your clothes?
Andrew, this is so brilliant because notice what the but does. It immediately filters out the will deliver it all. I'm just rephrasing what you said. This, this is, by the way, what Fernando did. I studied with him for 2-3 years, and he would talk about analyzing the languaging of things. And that's so like, will deliver it all. That's a statement. But when I say but, now we filter that out. They don't hear that because of what you just said. But notice that that's something from the past. And what part of this can be delivered sooner? So actually, the but is causing the trigger to some level and the filtering to some level. And that's really great because I knew this about but I never really thought about it in this case, I'll admit. So, okay, so now that's another interesting question. Yeah, Susan, I got another interesting
I was gonna
question.
say that's why in improv you never say yes, but you say yes and.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was
but
just gonna say, if you replace the word but in the paragraph with and, I think you would get a very different reaction. Oh yes, it'll take us about 6 months to deliver everything, and some things can be delivered even sooner.
so we could change this to, yeah, you see, I'd actually figured all this out and I wanted to evoke things here and get this lets up. I'm just kidding. So this is actually good. Let's take this. Let's take this as a writing this up because I just totally love this. Just further the conversation here. So we could say, come here. So a better question. A better question would be, so you're saying, and what there was something else you said though. We'll deliver it all. And I'm not sure I
Deliver it
like the and.
sooner.
There was something else you said though about we can often actually do this. We can often deliver part of it sooner. Do you know what that would be? That's
Or
at
just
least
simply, which would you prefer? Because
okay.
do you know is like a binary, yes, no.
That's right. That's
Uh,
right. That's good. Which would
which would add the most value, or which would you prefer, right?
which what part would give you the most value?
Something along those lines, right? Because
Now they
then you
still may
frame
get
it.
triggered.
I actually think it's have the biggest impact because they probably don't really understand what we mean by value in their frame of reference.
It's so
So
good.
because we want to put it in their world, so it's the biggest impact to them.
So they don't filter it or transform it.
And
Yeah,
you could
we'll
say,
deliver it all. And we can often deliver part of it sooner. What part would give you the biggest impact? Well, let's just compare these two. I love it. I love it. Because I'll admit, my intention, which was then my filter here, this is so perfect. I love it when I learn from y'all. I just had a major learning here because there are two things here. One is the learning of how people react. That's what I was noticing. Most people don't even recognize this. And I kind of knew that, yeah, we trigger in our conversation and stuff like that. But I never took it deeper to really analyze it to figure it out. And this is so much better. We'll deliver all, but what part of this can be delivered sooner? Now, the lesson to get here is not, oh, this is how, this like some courses will teach you how to ask better questions. Okay, well, that's good. We've gotten how to ask better questions, but that's not the point here. The point here is understanding this. And then we could build and enhance models. Okay, so anything else, or I think we're pretty good with this exercise. I did want to do one other thing. Okay. Okay, so these two are highly related to each other, and I want to make that clear. And this is one of the things that I'll probably talk about this afternoon, because I am really convinced now that there's just not an opening in the Agile space for new ideas. I actually posted something about this. I said, I wrote that the problem with the Agile wars is that they really aren't Agile wars. People are mostly trying to say things to improve things, but people are defending against them. And where there's this defensive posture instead of, well, what can I learn from that? And what part of that problem is filters, transformation, and triggers. And we don't look at distinctions. So what we want to look at, what are distinctions? This is another term I got from Flores. Experts have more useful ones. Less competent people use poor ones. Now, competency, this is the other key piece, is that competency is only in a domain. Okay, I'm not as good as that skier for sure. I don't see Snow as good as that skier for sure, but I'll bet you I know more. I don't know who he is, but on average, I'll bet I know more about lean and flow than he does. That doesn't make me better or worse. Doesn't make him better or worse. We are competent in domains. That's another critical thing. There's also what I learned from Flores, and he used Bobby Fischer as an example. Fischer was a brilliant chess player, not so good social. Okay, he lives by himself, and just a variety of things. So
I have a question on this, because I was actually explaining this to someone recently.
Yeah.
And I know that you are competent in a domain. However, getting back to our last conversation, if I explained this to certain people this way, they would immediately think that I was saying that they were less competent, and they would shut down and not listen to anything else that I would have to say.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying tell people this.
No, but how do you explain? Because you want to kind of explain to people that this happens. But by explaining to people that this happens, you're exposing something that they don't know, that they arguably ought to know in many cases. So without giving them the whole, self-awareness 101 and competency in domain and whatever else, how do you get around this when you explain this concept?
Okay, so I don't usually explain this to people except when they're in a workshop like this. But if I were, okay, this is what I would do. I would, first of all, one of the examples I use is, I've mentioned this before, was my wife. I said, I'm very, I've never thought of myself as being more intelligent than my wife, and not just for self-preservation reasons. Truth is, I never have. That if you have a math problem or a scientific problem or something where you need, someone to figure things out like that, an engineering problem, it could come to me. If you have a problem that involves people, emotional stuff, how to raise kids, go to her. So if I were to do this, by the way, I just love that quote by Einstein. If I were to do this, I would say, I would ask something about, let's look at, I would talk not about them, I would talk about me. So that, to try to evoke it less, because what you're saying is right. What you're saying is that we will almost certainly evoke some filter transformation triggers. They don't hear you say they have something intelligent. They hear you say they're stupid. So they transform that. Yeah, no, I agree. That's a good point.
Because in the situation that I was in, I was trying to introduce some distinctions, right? And so I was trying to explain the context of why these distinctions were important and whatever else. And
well, that's a different question. Then I wouldn't.
but it is related because I found myself
related.
wanting to kind of explain this theory and the model, but then realized that if I explained it, I would set myself up for them actually being pissed off about and ignoring what I was trying
Right.
to say because they weren't competent enough to have the distinctions that I have. And oh,
Okay.
aren't I so great?
Okay, so I would not, in that situation, I would not talk about this overall model. I'm trying to create a model here. I would just talk about the distinctions. What happens a lot in the agile space, especially on LinkedIn, is you'll say things that are different. They'll say, oh, you're just trying to market or you're just making up something. So that you can see there, we've had a filter, transformation, and a trigger. Oh, somebody's selling me snake oil. Oh, there really is no difference and all that. So then that's a different topic. I have a lot to say on that later in this track. I'm not going to do it right now. Okay. And I'm glad you said this though, because we write a lot about this in the book. And part of it is you have to, I'll tell you, I won't tell you exactly how, but I'll tell you the idea of it is you accept their thinking and then you let their thinking guide them into that they're missing something. And then they, oh, yes. But see, here's another thing that's a problem. That's kind of a trigger. And that is when you're doing something wrong, but you think you're doing it correctly, how does it feel? So you're doing it wrong, but you think you're doing it right. How does it feel? Yeah, it feels good, right? Now, the moment you detect that you didn't do it wrong, that it was wrong, and now you realize I see the right way to do it. So when you go from doing it wrong but not knowing to doing it now knowing how to do it correctly, how do you feel? Usually, oh crap, how could I be so stupid? Now think about this. This is a crazy human mechanism. In other words, it feels bad to learn something to a lot of people. You know, this is one of the things that slows learning down. And it's kind of what you're talking about, Andrew. So one thing we have to be aware of, that's a trigger. Not being told you're doing something wrong, just discovering yourself you're doing something wrong evokes I'm stupid. Now, you have to get out of that. This is one of those lifelong coaching things. Realize, oh no, I'm not stupid. I just learned how to do something. But the reason it's so hard to get out of it is because as a little kid, your parents told you you're doing it wrong and were not approving. It's not, oh, you're doing that wrong. I love you so much. That was so great. No, it's usually you're doing it wrong. Come on, stop that. Those are stacks. That's your stack. And every time you now trigger your own stack attack. Okay. I'll talk more about that in this series as we go. That's part of the coaching workshop. Okay, Abizi, do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask, what is the difference between a specialist and an expert?
Okay, yeah, I'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
Okay, Susan, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say that to Andrew's original question, sometimes the way I have addressed it is to say that is to describe a situation in the past when I was in a similar dilemma and found out that there was something different that I should be considering. Because then it's me talking about how dumb I was, and now I'm maybe a little smarter, but just because I learned something.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really what open-mindedness is actually not getting defensive about learning, but a lot of people are very defensive. I have a graph I'll add to this as well, but I'm probably not going to find it just quick look, so I'll ignore it for the moment. So if easy, what I'm talking about an expert is I'm talking expertise and specialists go together, but they're not necessarily, they're correlated, but not the same thing. So an expert is somebody who actually has competency in something. And a specialist is somebody who actually specializes. In other words, that's what they focus on. Now, typically you focus on something so you can increase your expertise. Like in the medical field, you'll have specialists like, like my dad used to be an internist. That's not an intern. That's a doctor on internal medicine. He specialized in internal medicine. So he spent a lot of time specializing in internal medicine. So he was a really expert on internal medicine. So specialists, what has been demonstrated in development is that a collection of specialists who know how to work together, it's not the specialists that make them good, it's their expertise. It's really people have different expertises on a team that can work together. are better. The problem with people who specialize is they sometimes think that what they know is what's really important, is the most important. The other people's stuff doesn't make so much difference. Now, you can specialize without that attitude, but a lot of people do. And in fact, there is a why teams sometimes tend to specialize in database and mid-tier and UX is a part of that. So by expertise, I mean somebody who's got really good at it. So the notion of a distinction is a difference of or contrast. And I'm usually talking about things like so I found this graph someplace, and see, you can see there's so many kinds of snow. Whereas me, I used to ski, but I haven't in years. So I know powder. I know powder that's really nice, really light. I know powder that's kind of that you'll light powder you'll sink into. There's also powder that's not quite as fluffy, you don't sink into. But mostly the other snows I know are, is it safe to drive on? Is it good snowball making snow? Is it yellow? Is it kind of wet? And that's all I know. But look at all you could possibly know. Imagine actually this nice little picture, a guy who's plowing the snow. Do you think he looks at the snow a little bit differently than the way I look at the snow? Probably. Skiers look at the snow differently. So this is the other term for expertise and specialist. A plow person will know more about snow and plowing it because that's his job type thing. Okay, questions on this? This is kind of clear, but I need the term. I need the term. I'm not sure I have time to do the two more things I wanted to do, but I might. Okay, so this is not Fernando's model, but this is a more popular one. So I'm just going with these terms. There's kind of a novice. He's just starting to learn what's going on. I could put down here ignorant person. They're not even aware of it, but ignorance, which is kind of funny. There's nothing wrong with being ignorant, but we think there's something wrong with being ignorant. Probably as kids, we were called ignorant in a negative way. Everybody's ignorant about more stuff than they possibly are even aware of. But boy, if you tell somebody that, trigger filter transformation. Don't tell people that. Okay? You're an ignoramus is an insult. Well, we're all ignoramuses, actually. But when you say ignoramus, you mean you're not only ignorant, you're not capable of learning. So that's the problem. Okay, so by this I mean I barely know how to do it. I'm advanced. I can do it a little bit on my own. I can do it on my own. I'm proficient. I can go expert. I can now transcend things. Fernando talked about it a little differently. He would talk about it as like a beginner, like advanced beginner, competent, but then we talk about virtuoso and expert. In fact, I might put that, I might dig out my notes to remember his terms exactly, because I actually kind of liked it. But the point is, experts have distinctions worth attending to. Novices look at things they shouldn't attend to. This is one of the big problems. That people are looking at stuff they shouldn't be paying attention to, and that is an issue. Okay, understanding first principles helps tremendously. Why? Because first principles are universal, at least if you've identified them properly. So that gives us guidance all the time, and you can talk about them. They're also objective, not subjective. So I've created a list of first principles that I use in Amplio, but I stated this any number of times, and I kind of restate it because most people don't take this attitude. They're not my first principles. Like, this is what I'm saying is true. I'm saying it from a scientific point of view, where it can be observed, they can be validated, they can be tested in an objective way. So when we disagree with them or see a better way to talk about them, there's no authority here. We have to go back to what does the evidence lay itself? So that gives us an objective way of looking at this. So, this is really what's important here is we filter things out. We want to create a conversation of distinctions to use. Now, I'm not going to do this, but this is what I'm going to pick up with next week, is how to use this knowledge, how to create a path for learning. Now, we've talked in the Amplio business agility track about the improvement the improvement path, and there's a reason for the ordering. Some things set up other things to be learned. Okay. Okay, so I could rush through that, but I'd rather just take the time next week to do it and get some questions, further conversation.
You know, one of the things I just put in the chat was certainly I notice it in my space, because everybody is so focused on very tactical things generally, and they're experts. I mean, they are world renowned experts in that area. But if you look at what they do in the context of the larger system of which it's a part, then suddenly that expertise doesn't really mean that much. And so they're not really open to coming on that journey with you, not because you're making them look stupid, but because you're actually taking away something that matters to them a lot, that they've worked really hard to achieve, which is their status as an expert.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of people are that way. And what's interesting is uh, I have found that you know, a lot of it has to people who appeal to authorities and things like that are harder to interact with because of that. And you know, you see a lot of this in the agile space. People talk about peer-reviewed pictures and things like that. And to be candid, um, you know, by the time you get something peer-reviewed, somebody else has figured out a better way to do it already. Uh, but that's kind of an appeal to authority. I admit I do not quite know how to deal with that because but my approach has been, well, there are two cases here. There's the case, how do you deal with it publicly? And then there's the case of how do you deal with it on site? When I'm on site and talking to somebody, or now maybe remote, I suppose, the way I deal with it is I recognize that's there. You can tell when they have this, right? That's part of their listing and filtering and all that. So then you have to be very ginger about it. You have to recognize that that you're on thin ice, and you have to appeal to their way of speaking and not trigger them. And sometimes you just can't do anything with them. That's part of the issue. But what I do is I still take it as responsible. In other words, I will still say, how can I, even though in my mind I'm thinking they have this attitude and stuff, but I will ask, how can I make a difference with them? How can I come at this? So I can still take responsibility. We talked about this a few weeks ago, of the responsibility of seeing to make a difference. So you still be responsible. So they have their filters, they have their transformations and all that. You be responsible that they have them, but you're going to talk in a nice way. And then you keep looking at ways to you know, make a difference with it. Yeah, this is where a lot of things, the dogma in the agile space has gotten very difficult, because one of the things related to what you said is Upton Sinclair's comment. It's hard to it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. But you could also say it's hard to get a man to understand something when his ego is, rather, when his perception of himself depends on his not understanding it. So it all fits. Okay, anything in closing? I kind of thought this session went how I was hoping it would. Any feedback on this or other things?
Good session.
I'm sorry, what?
It's a good session.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I like this too. Well, in the coaching track, I'm going to try to do more like this, because I think this is more depends on experiential. And the other tracks I'll do a little bit more like this, but there is more content there. But anyway, I'll talk to some of you this afternoon. It'd be great if you could come. I've got some, really need some input from y'all. So thanks. Talk to you later.
Good session. Yes. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.